Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Olim for Democracy's first webinar. We're just going to wait a couple minutes for people to join, and then we are going to get started. So we'll just give it another minute. Okay, I think we can get started. We got already over 100 people close to get in the call. My name is Eli Koaz. I am one of the founders of Olim for Democracy, and we're very excited to get this conversation started. For some introductory remarks, I'm going to turn the call over to Kalela Lancaster, another one of the Olim for Democracy's founders, and then we'll get to our main program with former Minister of Justice Dan Meridor and our own Paul Gross. So Kalela, over to you.
Thanks, Ellie. So hi there, I'm Kalela, and I'm really happy that we're getting this webinar series off the ground. I just wanted to say a word about this entity, which we've called Olim for Democracy, which we just launched really just a few weeks ago at the, or maybe a month ago at the beginning of March. It started out in parallel, two parallel initiatives of the same name. I founded one of them with Deborah McNaji-Bailey, and Ellie founded another one, and we met up and got together and merged, and now we're all in it together. Essentially, we felt around a month ago that the crisis that's going on in our country was something that we Olim, who came here by choice, needed to find our own voice within. We knew that a lot of people were active and a lot of people were organizing as part of broader protests, and we knew that a lot of people were very concerned, and maybe some were not fully following everything or understanding, or felt sometimes that they needed a bit of a bridge to understand exactly everything that was going on. Such a fast-paced protest with things changing all the time. So we really wanted to set something up that would help to make the protest movement more accessible to Olim, and help Olim to have a voice of their own within it, representing, like I say, communities of people from all over the world who moved here by choice, whether or not they were leaving challenging situations or easy situations. They all came here by choice. And so that's what we did, and many of you signed the letter that we wrote that had quite an impact. We wrote it to the Minister of Aliyah and Klita, and also the Minister of Diaspora, and we also copied it to the chair of the Jewish Agency. And the following day after we sent it, the Jewish Agency also came out taking a position on this crisis. So that's all I want to say for now. I want to say thank you to everybody for signing our letter, for being a part of this with us. And I want to thank in particular Paul Gross, my colleague, who I'm going to hand things over to now. Paul also joined our core team with this initiative straight away, and has been helping us to think through what we could do, what we could put together that would be beneficial and that would serve the Olim community and also leverage the voice of the Olim community. This webinar series is Paul's baby, so I'm going to hand over to him. And I also just want to quickly say that it's very nice to see Dan, who is actually a relative of mine by chance, Dan Meridor. We're very honored that you're here, and Paul will say more. So thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much, Kalela, and thank you, Eli, for your opening words as well. Welcome, everybody. This is the first in a series that we're going to be doing. You can already set in your calendars. The next one is the 16th of April, the first, I think it's the first Sunday after Pesach. We will have with us Susie Navot, the Vice President of the Israel Democracy Institute. So put that in your calendars already. Now, it's really a great pleasure and honor to have with us Dan Meridor, who not only is one of the most qualified people in Israel to talk to about the current crisis that we face. But is also someone that I personally have learned a huge amount from, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know a little through my my work at the Begin Center. Dan Meridor was born in Jerusalem in 1947. He's a lawyer by profession. His long career in politics began in 1982 when he was appointed cabinet secretary by Prime Minister Menachem Begin. He was elected to the Knesset for the first time in 1984 with the Likud. He was a cabinet minister in numerous governments, including serving as Minister of Justice, which we will be talking about, and also Minister of Finance, Minister of Intelligence and Atomic Energy, Deputy Prime Minister, and since 2014, he has served as President of the Israel Council on Foreign Relations. Dan Meridor, welcome. Thank you.
Good to be with you. Good evening, everyone.
So there are many ways in which your experience and your knowledge and everything that you've done in Israeli life could be of use to us at this very difficult time. But I think in particular, your spell as Minister of Justice in the early 90s is, I think, where we should start, because you were the Justice Minister, late 80s, early 90s, when in 1992, the Knesset passed two basic laws, human dignity and liberty and freedom of occupation, which were really groundbreaking basic laws. The first time that fundamental civil rights were laid out and legislated in Israel. In many respects, the closest thing that Israel has to a kind of Bill of Rights. And today, these laws, and actually that whole episode, is viewed by many in the government and supporters of the government as the start of what they think went wrong, what they are trying to undo in many ways. And because the purpose of these webinars is to try to, in some way, debunk some of the myths and the misleading claims and the half-truths and out-of-context pieces of information that we get fed by the government and its supporters to justify what my organization, Olim for Democracy, what we see as a power grab by the coalition, this sort of move away from liberal democracy with its checks and balances to something else, something closer to a sort of Hungary situation with no independent judiciary to protect minority rights. Because of that, I think we really couldn't have a better person than you, Dan, to talk to us about what were the actual motivations behind these laws? What were they intended to do? What were they not intended to do? What were they intended to do? And how much truth is there in the claim that the laws were passed in the middle of the night with no one really knowing about them, which is one of the things you hear, where people didn't know that the Supreme Court was going to have this kind of authority. Can you take us back to that period, enlighten us, when you were at the center of this story as Justice Minister?
Well, let's start with the anomaly. The anomaly is Israel might be the only country on earth, Britain is an exception, that has no written constitution. And this is an anomaly. And the Knesset decided, rather than having a constitution, that we will pass basic laws one by one. Each of them will be a chapter in the constitution. When I became Minister of Justice in the late 1988, there were already 9 basic laws dealing with the Knesset, with the government, with judiciary, with many other institutions, nothing about human rights. This law was missing, and no basic law that organizes it all, what we call basic law legislation. It was a unique opportunity because then we had a government supported by 97 members of the Knesset, a national unity government led by Yitzhak Shamir. I was the Minister of Justice, and I knew that there was a wide support for adding these chapters to a constitution. To be very honest, the main hurdle or obstacle was the objection of the Haredi parties who didn't want the constitution for their reasons. I can go to it later. And now they had no veto power because we had a huge government and we did not depend on them. So the first thing I did is to set a team in the Ministry of Justice with me, and within 3 months, we came with a draft for basic law of human rights. The other law that we were preparing was basic law legislation. It was finished in April of '89. I brought it to the cabinet, and the cabinet discussed it, and very positively. And by my request, they moved it to the Ministerial Committee of Legislation to be discussed and finished and brought to the Knesset, which is what we did. I had this idea that you can't, or shouldn't at least, have a constitution passed by a small majority. I wanted a very wide support because it's a constitution, even if the law doesn't say it. We need it to be very widely supported. So we went with it, including some compromises to allow the religious guys to come in. And by November this year of 1989, we were with, I would say, 90% agreed. There was still some outstanding issues, especially with one party, Shas. They did not want it. The Mafdal, the National Religious Party, was more or less on board. They had some changes they wanted. But they even pressured me, let's pass it without Shas. And I said, no, I want Shas to be on board. I had the mistaken view, evidently, that I have time. 4 years of government, we don't rush a constitution. There was a member of the opposition called Amnon Rubinstein, still with us, a professor of law, very fine man. And he saw that my proposal that was published in the press, everybody spoke about it, was not going fast enough. So he adopted my proposal, said, this is the Meridor proposal, I propose it as my own Knesset, I'm not bound by coalition and so forth. By November, his proposal, which is my proposal, passed the preliminary reading with vast majority, something like 60 to 20. And within this, it said that the Supreme Court will have the power to overview and decide unconstitutional basic laws, laws that may infringe on human rights improperly. We are still discussing it. And then Mr. Peres, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs in that cabinet, decided to throw down the government, throw up the government, and try to establish his own government, in a way betraying Shamir, I have to say. He was able to topple down the government, but he could not build a new government. Shamir was faster, but Shamir had to give in to the Haredi parties, to Shas, not to continue with basic laws without their consent, and he agreed, and understandably. So the whole process was stuck. In the coming year or so, Amnon Rubinstein took my proposal and divided it into 4 proposals, each of them with few rights taken from the whole list. And after a long deliberation in the Knesset, in the Constitution and Law Committee of the Knesset, there were compromises made with the religious parties, and this ended up in 1992 with the basic laws of human dignity and liberty and basic law of freedom of occupation. It was a compromise. We couldn't get in everything. They did not agree to the word equality, God forbid. Can you think of equality of men and women or Arab and Jew and so forth? But they had many other things that are very important. Everybody understood that this means that from now on, the Knesset will not be able to detract from these rights, basic rights, unless it's done in a proper way, not more than needed, and that the court evidently will have the right to decide this. How do I prove this? Because in the law that was passed, there is a sentence saying it will relate only to laws in the future, not in the past. They were afraid that we will, with this new law, abolish laws in the past that have succeeded in marriage and divorce and other things that are important to religious guides. Why did they ask for this if they didn't understand that it may infringe on law, it may affect laws? So of course they didn't understand this, it passed. The tragedy or the comedy is that it was in March. March was in the middle of an election campaign that were about to come in, I think, May or June or May, and everybody was busy with his own party. And the Likud and Labour Party, who are now opposition coalition, had set off each other, so with very few people in the Knesset. And I'm saying it in my speech in the Knesset, you are setting off one another, it look as if there's not enough support, although the Likud, in 90% of the people were for it, the Labour were for it, the left-wing Mapam and Ratz were for it, Raful's party, there were about 100 members for it, but they didn't show up. So it did pass with a number not impressive at all, 30-something against 20, I think. And the few days after it, I said, we have here a constitutional revolution, because for the first time the Knesset, as the constituent body that decides what the basic laws are, changed the Knesset as the legislature and said, you can't, from now on, you can't infringe on human rights unless it's done with a proper way, not more than needed, and so forth. Not only this, somewhat later, in 93, a year later, the Likud General Convention, with thousands of delegates all over the world, endorsed it and said, we are proud that we have done it. We'll continue to protect the other rights that are not in, like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, equality, and so forth. In the meantime, just a month or two earlier, in January of 92, the Shamir government took my proposal and put on the Knesset, in the Knesset table, basic law legislation that says, again, the court will have a right to overview and have judicial review over basic laws, over laws, whether they are compatible with the basic laws or not. So it was clear to everybody.
Yeah.
Later, there were other developments. In 94, there was the amendment because they understood that the law, somebody wanted to import non-kosher meat. And they were afraid that the law that they will pass will not meet the criteria of basic law of occupation. People have a right to do what they like in their business. So they changed the law on this of occupation, but they introduced, with my initiative, to both laws another basic sentence that says, it introduces in the Declaration of Independence with its values. So it was known to everybody. Everybody knew about it, and everybody was happy. Nobody said it was not legitimate and so forth. Later, people tried to reinvent the past and say, we didn't know, we didn't understand. I don't know what everybody understood, but it was all written all over the press and everybody spoke of it. I'm proud to have done it. I have to say this in a political way. I come from a party, Likud, that was established by Menachem Begin, called, the name of it is not a national or right-wing party. It's a national liberal movement. The combination, or the balance, if you wish, between those two basic, hugely important values of national values, the Jewish people, Jewish cause, Jewish homeland, Jewish independence, and the liberal values of humanity, of people, not only state by people, not only majority but minorities. This was a rare combination, a genetic code that is very much Begin, and Begin was always speaking for the right of the court to decide that laws that infringe on human rights should not be, that the court has a right to say that they are not legitimate. So I did it in the spirit of Begin. I quoted Jabotinsky in my speech. This was the Likud of the day. Now it's, of course, entirely different.
Yeah, we'll get to that. And Dan, thank you very much for that, because it's really important that we go over that stuff, because we hear so often now in the current debate that, for example, the vote on those laws was so poorly attended. It just shows that it wasn't even really that legitimate because not many people voted. And as you're telling us, it was really just by chance that not many people showed up because of the time of year of the election campaign. And it was something that had the support of most of the major parties. And I think it's true to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that if this were a bill that there was a lot of opposition for, then people would have rushed back to vote against it, right? The fact that so many people just didn't bother to show up, I think shows that this was something that had brought.
By the way, Paul, it was clear that it was passed, so people didn't think it was important for them to vote. By the way, 94, when the amendment was made to two laws, it passed by 79 or 78 votes against 20 or something. So there was a vast majority for it anyway. And it's simply in the era of fake news and of gaslighting, whatnot. You hear these accusations; they are simply without any foundation.
Right, and I just want to say something I should have said at the beginning to our audience. Please do write questions into the Q&A button, the Q&A facility at the bottom of your Zoom screen, because we're going to put some of those questions to Dan a little bit later. So one of the things that came out of what you just told us is, which is really interesting in light of where we are now, is that actually the original intention was to establish something much more comprehensive and far-reaching than what initially emerged, something that would have really created a serious protection for equality and human rights in Israel, which the basic laws don't do fully. And I think, and maybe if you could just relate to this briefly, one of the criticisms that we hear is that the court under Barak took the human dignity idea and made it too broad somehow, that they used it to protect human rights more broadly in a way that they weren't allowed to. Now, what's interesting is that the intention all along was to have something more comprehensive. So it's, in a way, it's a little bit disingenuous of people to claim now that somehow that was not, we were never supposed to have such wide-reaching protections.
Yeah. Well, Aaron Barak, whom I know personally, and I think is one of the most interesting and important figures in Israel scenery and Israel legal world, and in the world-renowned man, wonderful person, modest person. He does not claim that he created this revolution. He says the Knesset created it. And he had no choice but to decide what the Knesset said. The Knesset said laws should not pass if they don't meet certain criteria. So this is what I'm doing. By the way, the judgment that was given by him in 1995, the Mizrahi case, has been given by him and the other judges, including the former Chief Justice Shamgar. Meir Shamgar was, by the way, a member of the Irgun Etzel, a fighter of the Etzel, detained by the British in Africa with my father in the mid-40s. So it was a consensual thing. It's not Barak on his own, although he is a great judge to me. The question is a good one. And I would say the following. Having been a member of the Knesset for a good number of years, I think members of the Knesset should feel ashamed that to this day, it's 75 years, there's no basic law that says what every constitution in the world says, all people are equal before the law. They don't say it. Or there is a right, freedom of speech, what the Americans would call First Amendment. The Knesset was not able to bring itself to say this basic element that is on which democracy is built. So they don't do their job in putting in the protection of human rights. And when the court comes in and helps them, they attack the court for doing it. The shame is on the Knesset. It's not judicial activism, it's parliamentary passivism.
Right.
It was their role to write that all men are created equal, you don't discriminate because of race and gender and so forth, as every constitution does. Even the ugly countries have good constitutions. We don't have it. Had it not been for the court, equality would not have been a major principle in our legal system. So yes, Barak interpreted, not only Barak, the court interpreted the word human dignity, which passed as including equality, including the right to speech, including autonomy, which is, I admit, a broad interpretation. I'm very happy of it. Otherwise, we would have really stayed to this day without those basic values in the constitutional level of equality and freedom of speech and freedom of religion. So rather than thanking Barak and the judges and the Supreme Court from day one of the country for filling in those holes that the Knesset didn't fill up, they're attacking them now. I think it's shameful.
And of course the accusation that's thrown around now is that the courts have too much power, and these proposals, these reforms, will redress that balance. And it's required, and they need to do that because the courts are unelected, unaccountable, etc.
Okay, this is a serious issue because it's about what democracy is.
Right.
I understand people in the street, if they don't think much, if you ask them what is democracy, they will say rule of majority. Everybody votes, majority rules. It's true. It's a necessary condition. It's not a king or dictator or a general of the army or a ruling family. Don't relate to anything present. No, it is true. This is a necessary element. It's not sufficient. Every dictator usually has majority. Stalin has majority. And you look around the world, don't want to Mussolini as majority. There is another element in democracy which is necessary. What is the limits of majority? Can majority do whatever they like? No, there are human rights. The essence is the human being. States are created for human beings, not the other way around. And there should be some guarantee that the majority will not infringe on my personal right, my property, my right not to be arrested, my right to speak, my right to vote, my right to be treated honestly. Who will do that? The majority? We are afraid of majorities to do that. So in democracy, it's clear that human rights are a constituent element. Without it, there's no democracy. Who can protect human rights? So the parliament in Israel is in fact controlled by the government, because it's like in Britain, the cabinet is elected by the parliament, not by the people. So it's one body in most cases. The only independent body that can stand against the huge power of ministers, I was one, I can tell you, it's huge power, and government is an independent body, does not need to get elected and does not want to flatter the voters or to look at the polls, but has to stand by the basic values on which the country was established. You can read them very well in the Declaration of Independence, including full equality and freedom and so forth. And of course, it does not, it has to be independent. That means it does not take orders from the government. What they want to do now, having controlled legally and normally the government and the Knesset, they want to control the court as well. Because they say, who is the court? Why should they decide? Menachem Begin, in his speeches from 50s and on, the Likud founder and leader, says it is democracy, that people who are not elected, judges who are not elected, would guarantee human rights in their ability to strike out laws that infringe on human rights. By the way, there's no guarantee here, because if the court is their court, it will be like the American court between 1776 and Lincoln, where blacks didn't vote, nobody mattered. Yeah. If the court is with the government, there's no human rights. Yeah. We need a court that's independent, that is based on and sworn to stand on and strictly on basic human rights. Protect and every one of us individually and the groups we are in, all of us are sometimes majority, sometimes minority. At the same time, we're majority on this and minority on that. We need protection, and the court is the only independent body that can do that. And what they want to do is not to redress a problem. They want to change the system in that there will be one power in the hand of one man or one party. And if he's a nice ruler, it would be nice. If he wants to harm us, he will harm us. Nobody will defend the individual or the group against the power of the government. This is not democracy. So
just very specifically on the judges, another thing we often hear is that in the current system, the judges choose the judges, which is of course not true, because of the appointments committee. That's not how it works, and we know that. But are you personally, are you content with the current way it's done, where you have four elected representatives, 3 sitting justices, 2 members of the Bar Association? You have to get a special majority of 7 out of the 9 for a Supreme Court justice. Is that something you're happy with? Would you support any kind of reform on that, or are you just sort of, you're opposing what the government is currently just suggesting, which, as you say, is control by the coalition? But where do you stand on that issue?
No system is flawless and perfect. In every system you can find problems, and every system can be corrupted by corrupt people if they come in. This is clear and easy. We know that. But if I compare it to other systems, and I can tell you that when I was Minister of Justice and in other functions I had, the admiration in the world to the Israeli system is widespread. What do we have there? We have a committee of 9 people. 2 government ministers, including the Minister of Justice heading the committee and another minister, 2 members of the Knesset, traditionally one of the opposition, one of the coalition. So we have 3 for the coalition, 1 for the opposition. But they are only, this is the 4. Now you have 2 members of the bar, people that know the lawyers, know the life in court, and 3 members of the Supreme Court, including the Chief Justice. So it's a very balanced situation. The Supreme Court cannot on their own decide. The government cannot on its own. The Knesset cannot. The bar cannot. They need to do and work together. I've been sitting in that committee for 8 years, practically 4 years Minister of Justice heading the committee, and 4 years a member of the Knesset when I was there. And I don't remember the debates that we hear now between conservative and liberal judges. The Likud is a liberal party. Was the name is Liberal National. So nobody spoke of this. Whether the judge is leftist or rightist. No, we needed good people who stand by the basic values of the country, who were in consensus there. Not the politics. The politics were not, and the policy was not. But the basic values were consensual. So there was no problem, and I think it worked well. It is the system that works for 70 years now. I think the law was passed in 1953. As they say in English, good or bad English, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
It's not broke, it works. It works well. Not all the appointments I like, some appointments I don't like. Some appointments I made in the retrospect, I think I was mistaken. You cannot know how a person will act in the end. You have assessment, you hear all sorts of things about him from other people, and you decide. So yeah, mistakes may be made, but as a whole, the Israeli legal system is highly appreciated in the world and in Israel. It has problems like all other systems. It's overloaded and they need more manpower. There are things that can change it. Like I think the Supreme Court should not deal with 10,000 cases a year, but with 100 cases. I think we should have a Court of Appeal below the Supreme Court, but this was rejected in the past. There are things that can be changed. But the basic idea that you have 4 bodies that represent the authorities and the professionals, and no one alone can decide. They have to come to understanding. I think it brought us good results to this day. I wouldn't change it the way they want, because they want to make it a political body, political appointments. And I think this is bad, especially as we don't have a constitution.
Right.
We don't have anything else to defend us against abuse of power by the power that is.
Right, and of course you often hear this like, oh, but it's like America. But of course it's not like America, because we don't have a written constitution. And in America, the Senate has to confirm the president's choice, and the Senate is often in the hands of the other party. Whereas here, the prime minister, by definition, controls the Knesset. It's a very different system.
So if I may say humbly, I don't think that the American system would be proud of that part of it, that the appointment is made politically. I think it's not highly recommended in most countries. Not, by the way, the Council of Europe issued an advice, I think, to the parties, the countries participating in the Council of Europe, that the importance of judges in the select committee. The judges should be a strong element in the select committee, because they are professional, they have no political agenda, and judges should have an important role. We don't have more than 3 judges out of 9, but this is in Europe now the rule that most countries follow. Yeah,
I think a lot of the American debate right now is exactly that. By the way, that there is too much politicization of the judges. Okay, let's move on to something that, I mean, you touched on it already when you've talked about your old party, the Likud. Now, one of the charges that's often thrown at the protest movement is that we're all a bunch of leftists. Right now, some of us are, some of us are not. It doesn't really matter. That's not what this is about. It's not political. It's about democracy and Zionism from our point of view. But clearly, the use of the word leftist is, I think, partly because it's become a term of abuse for some on the right, and partly because it helps feed the narrative that we're really just this group of sort of sore losers and we lost the election, and so this is an attempt to overturn the government in some way. But the reality is that it's a politically diverse group of people who are against the government's reforms. There's a significant minority, I think, of Likud voters who oppose the reforms according to the polls. You can also see in the polls the fall in the Likud and the rise in Benny Gantz's party, I think, also reflects that to some extent. So let me ask you about your old party, the Likud. You're one of the so-called Likud princes, if I can take you back to those days, one of the sons of former Likud or Herut politicians who fought in the Irgun. You were cabinet secretary for two Likud prime ministers. You were a minister in multiple Likud governments, including under Netanyahu. So do you see that the shift in the party, its move away from its liberal principles, do you think is that down to Netanyahu? Is it something that Netanyahu just sort of, it was happening anyway, and he's just it's convenient for him in a certain way now? How do you see what are the reasons for that?
Well, it's an important question. On Netanyahu, let me say this. I don't want to be personal here, but until some years ago, he openly objected all those proposals that are now on the table. Yeah. You can see him on YouTube and other places where he says, I will not allow to touch the composition of the select committee, openly, specifically. And he had a good relationship with Aaron Barak, with Dori Benish. I know it because I was there, and I heard from both sides, let me say, when they were meeting. And Aaron Barak said that Netanyahu defended the Supreme Court and gave him good marks on this. He was not there. I'm not sure he's like me in his philosophy, but he respected the legal system, the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, the police. What happened? Let me quote Minister of Justice of today, of the Likud, Yariv Levin. When asked what changed, he said 3 indictments. So why should I add more? I think this is a very dangerous situation. You know, it's not fun to be indicted. I understand it. I had the pleasure, but if somebody comes and say you're accused of robbing, of bribe, of murder, or something, it's not fun and people don't like it. But many people in many countries every year are indicted for all sorts of things. Now you're the prime minister. You should set an example how a defendant or how somebody who was indicted acts. So you need to defend yourself. Hopefully win it. You're still innocent until proven guilty. But what happened here is rather than defending himself in the best way he can, he attacked the system, attacked the police, head of police being Roni Alshef, a mitnachel, a settler with a kippah on his head. It was a Shabak man, one of the bright people of the Shabak for many years. Then Shai Nitzan, Boger Yeshivat Netiv Meir, studying Yeshivat Netiv Meir, he was made leftist too. And then Avichai Mandelblit, the Attorney General, who he appointed to be his Secretary of the Cabinet and then to be the Attorney General, and he is a Choser B'Tshuva, has a kippah on his head. His father was a member of the Likud Central Committee and a friend of mine, a supporter of mine. So to say that he is leftist, they're all after him, attacking the system, trying to really destroy the system, including through these reforms. This is unheard of. It's all fake. It's all not true. It's awful. So there is a Netanyahu story here because in order to get the majority, to have immunity, which he didn't get, now to have the coalition, he joined with forces that he shouldn't have joined. There are people that are, to me, illegitimate as members of the coalition. I mean, racists. We in the Likud party, and I can say I had an important role there, but we in the Likud party outlawed Kahana and the Kahanism, Kach party, in 1988. It's not easy to say that you can't run for election, but we said in a Jewish state, a party that incites racism cannot be legitimate. You can be for territories, for peace, for capitalism, socialism. You can't be a racist legitimately. And this was the rule of the judgment of the court, that the inciting racism is out and Kahanism is out. They were outlawed as a party. And it succeeded because in the election 2 years ago, Ben Gvir, who is a disciple of Kahana, got 0.5%. People understood it. In order to get a majority, he legitimized them and added forces between him and Smotrich. And now there are 14 votes in the Knesset, and they speak racist language. When Smotrich said, my wife will not be in the same room in the hospital with an Arab wife, do you imagine saying something like this about a Jew in London or in New York or in Paris? And in the Jewish state to hear these, so Netanyahu wasn't there, he's not a racist. But he wants to get off his back this problem that caused his trial, and he crossed lines. So it was born in sin, so to speak, this government. And I think this is a bad situation. So had it not been for him, we wouldn't have had all this. Yariv Levin had these ideas. I know him from the Likud party. He was on his own. Netanyahu heard him, never took it seriously. We all knew that this is his idea, okay, but it was not Likud's views. It was opposite to Likud's views. But there is another element I need to put here, if, with your permission, please. Somewhat broader. You know, there's a trend in the world that is quite alarming. In 1945, after the Second World War, when the horrors of the war were exposed to the world, to us, but not only to us Jews, to the world, there was an understanding that complete tyranny and part in countries that have dictatorship with no balance are very dangerous, whether it's Hitler, Mussolini, even Stalin. And there was a trend all over the world to say state, sovereignty, majority is not all. There's something above it. The criminals, the German criminals, were hanged in Nuremberg in the trials after the Second World War, although they did not infringe on any German law. But the world said that there's something above the German law, humanity, crimes against humanity. And later we Jews acted to liberate Soviet Jewry, and the Soviets said we had a law that does not allow them to leave. We said your law is not the end of the story, there's something above your law. So there was a trend all over the world, because of the horrors and the lessons, that sovereignty is not all, the country is not above everything, they're people, human beings, and they have rights, and they need to be protected from within the country and from without the country by international law. And all the way to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Most of the world spoke this language, not the Arab world, I have to say. Nothing happened there. In recent years, there's a backlash back to identity, national or religious, and not people and human rights. If you are Sunni or Shia in the Arab world, they kill you because of your identity, not because of something you said. You saw what happened between Shia and Sunni in the Arab world. You see what happened to Poland, who tasted democracy and went back to I don't know what. You see what happened in Hungary with Mr. Orban. You see Marine Le Pen in France getting 42%. You see Sweden. You see Bolsonaro. The world, I don't want to mention, a president is now being indicted in New York that speaks the language of America above everything. This is dangerous. The lesson has been forgotten. The world is going back from defending human rights and making the state a servant of the people rather than the other way around. You hear a different music in the world, and we may be part of that as well.
Right. Okay, that's really important. Thanks. So there's an international influence as well as contemporary
and we need to fight. Let me add this, Paul, and we need to fight.
Yeah.
Nobody will fight to us if we want to preserve
your
basic ideology, not only good ideology of liberal democracy or national liberal democracy, but if we, as Jews, we have been minorities, and some of us still are all over the world for 2,000 years, and we fought for human rights, individual rights, minority rights. We were not me personally. Jews were the champions of human rights in South Africa, in America, we're not. But of course, we were minorities. Now we are majority. We have the power in our hands. How do we behave? We don't care about minorities anymore. Now it's only majority. I was elected. I want to rule. Don't interfere. It's Jewishly wrong, not only democratically wrong.
Right. That's very powerful, and thank you for that. It's a message we should all take to heart. Okay, I'm gonna turn to the many questions that we've received from our audience. There's a lot of questions about the current situation. So I'm going to put some of those to you. There's a question here, which is okay. So there's a couple of questions about, one refers to a constitutional crisis, and one is about how that could happen, I think, which is what happens if firstly, do you think that the Supreme Court will strike down if there are these laws passed to change the system, essentially? Would the Supreme Court, in your view, strike them down? And then what happens if that does happen?
Well, the first question, the answer is I don't know. I know I need to see what is at stake, what law, what was passed, and then as a lawyer, as a legal thinker, whatever, I could tell you what I think. And probably I would say you need to strike it down, but I haven't seen it yet, so I need to be cautious. Will the court have the courage, the stamina? The court is not unanimous on these things. There are views normally. I think it's possible that they will strike down certain changes, and one needs to understand when Levin proposed this revolution, the Netanyahu ideas or his ideas, he said this is only phase one. And there is more. Now think of it. They need one thing first, to take the court off their shoulders. If the court isn't there, all the rest will pass. So they don't start now with the real issues later. They want to diminish, to lower, to weaken, almost to nullify the power of the court against the parliament or government. So this is the point of no return. If the court loses its power, we'll be defenseless against what comes later. So I hope that if something like this comes, they will court strike it. And what happens if they say, we don't give a damn, forgive me for the expression, we don't give it. So, of course, this is a revolution by the government against the state. The people who are the ministers are not ministers by the appointment by God or by Dei Gratia Regina, or Rex now in England. No, they are appointed by laws, and the laws define what the powers are, and the court interprets the laws. If they do things that they are not allowed to do by the decision of the court, they're acting outside their power, and they should not be listened to. And I think this is what probably will happen if they continue doing things and not taking into account the decision of the court. So, but I say it very generally. I don't know what issue will be on the table, what will be the decision of the court, and how it comes to be. It's not a constitutional crisis, it's a democratic crisis where a group of people act over the powers that they have. They don't have the power to do it, and they want to do it. This is not democracy.
Okay, thank you. So there's a bunch of questions about the current situation and how we move forward. I'm going to sort of try and combine them into one. We're at this stage now where we're at this pause in the proceedings. Netanyahu was persuaded, whether by the protests or by the strike from the Histadrut after his dismissal of Yoav Gallant, which now might be reversed. Where do you see things now? Do you think that we're going to? Do you have faith that the negotiations currently underway, hosted by President Herzog, that they could lead to a compromise? And if not, and if the legislation resumes after Pesach, as I think Miri Regev has said, or Yariv Levin has said, what should be the next step for those of us who are trying to fight this?
Well, of course, I can't predict the future. I can tell you my assessment.
Yeah.
The negotiations in themselves under the aegis of President Herzog don't seem to lead to any result because the gaps are very wide. If the government, that is Netanyahu and the people around him, decide to step down, it's a very respectable ladder that they are offered by the president. Like, all right, we got into negotiations, we are really dealing with the constitution here, so let's set up a council, a committee that will discuss in the coming year how to do it. This is the right way to do it, by the way, and take lawyers from both sides and the parties and the civil society and university people and try to create a constitution. You don't do it in political negotiation or compromise. It's not that sort of a crisis. You want to establish the basis of our constitution, the basic law of legislation, human rights. So you don't do it by negotiation overnight. You need to think. And we did it 4 years in 1982, from 88 to 92. It took us 4 years to get a small compromise. If that is what they want to do, but it depends on one thing. If Netanyahu is ready and able and willing to step down from this revolution that they are proposing. I don't know that he is. I don't know the opposite. It seems to me that he is in a limbo, but I'm not sure. I think there are very powerful forces around him from all sorts of angles that want to continue. And it made him, or it brought him to irrational decisions like sacking or firing the Minister of Defense and not firing him. It's a sham. It's something that I think many Likudniks rose against him for this. So I don't know if he continues with that, or he has the power of leading rather than being led by those people that take him almost as a captive. Now, it's his own issue. There were news on television last night or the night before that there is some sort of negotiations on the criminal issue, that they will try to find a way to a plea bargain. If he wants to end this with a plea bargain, he could have done it. His lawyer, Weinroth, who passed away, offered him, let's have a plea bargain. And they were on the way of doing it. And then he retracted. He thought that he can win election. If he goes back to a plea bargain, that's the best thing. Nobody wants to see and Mr. Netanyahu in jail if he's convicted. He may not be, but he doesn't know it either. So then they will find a way to do it in a respectful way. But if he wants to continue and he thinks he musters the majority in the Knesset of the 64, and unfortunately there's no one speaking there. I know some of them. I wouldn't say astonished. I'm devastated by the fact that no Likud member speaks a word. If he wants to continue, then we are in deep crisis. I can tell you something about that. I've been there with Menachem Begin, really a different caliber of a leader. But still, when he made certain things, there were people who opposed him. He went for peace with Egypt. Shamir abstained. Arens voted against. Olmert voted against. People had their views. I was with Shamir 7 years when he was in government. David Levy challenged him. Arik Sharon challenged him. Here, there's an aquarium of fish who don't say a word. You don't hear a voice. 31 members in Netanyahu, they have no views, no idea. They are all servants, or they all serve the person rather than the party, the ideas. It's a shame, I have to say. I hope something will change there. And if it changes, then we'll see a shift. As long as he thinks he has the majority and of course the Smotrich, Ben-Gvir are there, then we have a risk that we see a furthering this initiative and we'll be in a crisis. We'll need to pop up our objection, all within the law. I'm against breaching the law unless we come to a dictatorship. Then laws don't bind anymore in dictatorship, but we're not there. We're not there yet. We need to continue pressure from all sides. What will Biden's intervention do to him? I don't know. I have a rule. You may know it, Paul. I was asked by many people in the world press, New York Times, The Spiegel, whatnot, to give in. I said, no, I don't appeal to the world to interfere. I know it's a free world, they can quote me, but I don't appeal to Biden or to Macron or to the British or the German to interfere. It's our business. We need to settle it. But the fact that in 3 months, the country that was really prosperous economically and security-wise, and you saw people were happy, things were going well. In 3 months, what happened to our country? The shame that you feel that this is your country, the dangers and the risks to the economy expressed by his own people, that the governor of the Bank of Israel, the two governors, the one before that he appointed, speak in catastrophic terms. And what happens in the army never happened in the past. And the society is torn, and violence in the street. For what? In God's name, for what? So I hope that somebody, not one man in the end, it's 60-something people, somebody will say, hey, where do we go? Yeah. Stop it first, come back to normalcy. What happened now to our name in the world, in foreign affairs? In 3 months, for what? I hope it will stop somehow, but I can't guarantee it.
Right. Yeah, we're hoping for a Bibi change of heart or some Likud members to find their backbones. Okay, there's a lot of questions. We don't have much time. I'm going to put 2 questions to you at once, which you can address together. Ben-Gvir has come up a few times. I'd like you to address this question of this National Guard that Ben-Gvir is supposed to be running, the legality of it and the morality of it, perhaps. And also a political question, which is, do you think that Lapid and Gantz should be basically offering Bibi a way out and to join a coalition with him, essentially ending their boycott of him, to replace, on condition that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are removed essentially from the coalition?
Well, let me take the first and the second. The first is this National Guard. It's a shame and it's risky, it's dangerous that ministers will have private police with his ideas. After all, the man was convicted 8 times, 8 times convicted. The man was a Kahana disciple, and he went to the Kahana memorial about 2 years ago, participated in it, still his hero. And he put on his wall the picture of Baruch Goldstein, who murdered mercilessly the people in the Me'arat HaMachpelah, in the cave in Hebron, and the man, the police chief said, was responsible for the riots 2 years ago between Arabs and Jews. This man is now heading the police, and he wants to have his own private police that will not be under any professional inspector. This is really they sell everything. You don't deal with these things. You don't do it. Like you don't divide the Ministry of Defense, like putting Smotrich in part of the authority of the Ministry of Defense in the Ministry of Defense. Take the police and cut it into 2 or 3. What is it? What do you sell everything just to stay in power? It's very dangerous. I hope it will not. If it's a big commitment, probably it will not be made true. But they don't believe it, so they will extract it. And I hope it will not happen. Now about the other proposal. Yes, I very much hope that a possible way out is that Gantz and Lapid and others will say we are ready to go with Likud party. If Netanyahu wants to be there, he has to make some plea bargain or somehow to end the game. I think our part of ending the game is saying, thank you, I'm going home. I've been 15 years Prime Minister. And then the Likud has a right. They are the biggest party. They can lead the government. Not that I now agree with many of them, but this is the party that the people voted for. But to say to Netanyahu, because you attack the system, because you don't play by the rules, because you destroy our basic confidence in the system, then we will let you off the hook. This is really surrender to. I don't want to end the sentence. So this should not be the case. But if there's some way that the Likud wants to form a government with them, it should be done. I don't think Netanyahu can lead the government when he is indicted for bribe and 2 other serious charges of fraud and misbehavior. And this is not clear. We don't want to be in a situation where we don't know whether he took bribe or not. Maybe not. He is still innocent. He is innocent by the presumption of innocence. But you can't hold this presumption if you don't let the trial continue. So I think the people of Israel are entitled to know whether it's true or wrong. Maybe he will be acquitted. Okay, we'll applaud him. But to leave it unresolved and to go some coalition, what does it make of Israel? What sort of country we are?
Okay, we're nearly out of time. We have a lot of questions. I know there were a lot of people were asking more questions about the current situation. I do want to reassure people we're going to be having a number of different guests on these webinars, many of whom will be dealing much more with the current situation and where to go next. I didn't want to waste the opportunity, as we have Dan Meridor, to talk about what happened and its significance, because I think it's hugely significant, and he's the man to tell us. So I make no apologies for that. Dan, maybe we'll just end, if you can, you have 120 people or so here live, and many more who watch the recording, Olim from various countries who chose to come here, who came here inspired by the Zionist vision, by the idea of a Jewish and democratic state, many of whom came from democratic countries themselves. Can you leave us with some words of wisdom, something for us to take away and to go home with as we plan our next appearance at demonstrations wherever we live?
Well, first of all, I salute all of you. I did not have the chance to do what you have done. I was born here. My parents left Europe in the 30s, Zionists, and came here. So I did not have to make the choice that you have made to leave everything behind out of ideology, out of whatever, and come here and be part of us. So you deserve really a salute from me, because I envy you for that. Second, yes, it's a crisis time. But I think what we have seen in recent months is an awakening of the people. It's not the party, with all due respect, even to Gantz and Lapid. It's the people. It's the lawyers and the doctors and the officers and then the high-tech people. You saw the people. I'm taking part in some of the demonstrations. I speak at some of them. I've never seen anything like it. So there is a real power that is revealed here in the people. And you, I suppose, are part of that. Don't give up. We can't guarantee anything, but we need to ask ourselves, what do we do in this time of crisis? We want Israel to stay the country that we love, the country we are proud of. the country we can identify with, in spite of all sorts of political differences. And this is at stake. Every one of us has the power to add something to the fight. And I'm sure that you will do it in your own way, in demonstrations, in signing petitions, in writing the press, in talking, in convincing friends. It's really a major crisis, and there's nobody else will do it if we don't do it. We, the people, as the American declaration starts, we, the people, are the ones to do it. And yes, the government will have, I hope, to listen and to go away from this dangerous course that they've tried to take. There is a sign that something is moving. I can't give you a guarantee. There may be a trick, there may be a play. It's not yet finished. We need to continue struggling in a respectable way, not breaching the law, but pressuring as much as we can, so they won't move Israel from the path on which we are straddling for 75 years and more in Zionism, with the pride of being a free nation, with good economy, with good high-tech people, with justice, a feeling of justice. Yes, nothing is perfect, but we are proud of what we are doing. A miracle, if you like, that we have done, all of us, in the last almost 100 years of Zionism. And now to let all this come to some dark alley, and it's awful. So we need to continue struggling, and I hope we will, in the end, win this struggle and get back to the life we had before, and hopefully we'll have in the future. And of course, Pesach Kasher v'Sameach to those of you who keep kasher. I do. In Pesach, I'm strict on that, and I think that you deserve it. And the next lady you will hear next year is Susie Navot. Next week, she's great, and listen to her. She's really an expert and a very important views that she will share with you, I'm sure. So, Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Dan. Chag Sameach. It's a great pleasure and privilege to hear you and to benefit from your expertise and your knowledge, and you've enlightened us so much in a lot of the fake news, as you say, that we've been, the false facts, the alternative facts that we've been fed, and you're a voice of sanity and decency and democracy at this time. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. The people have asked about a recording. A recording of this is going to be out on our social media, on Twitter and on Facebook, so look out for that. As I said, and as Dan just reminded us, April 16th, I think that's 2 weeks from today, Susie Navot, Vice President of the Israel Democracy Institute, so look out for the link, for the registration link for that. Thank you everyone, Chag Sameach, we'll see you soon.